If you're wanting to buy a subject to deal in this market, I'm talking about keeping a 2, 3, or 4% interest loan that the seller has, keeping it in place, buying the deal and making it make sense. Again, with those numbers, it is imperative that you learn how to do those deals safely. Just watching a YouTube video a few times won't help. And guys, I'm telling you, there's even a lot of folks out there teaching about subject to that they don't know how to do them safely. I've been an experienced crave investor for years now, and it is painfully obvious that there's a lot of folks who are doing these deals wrong. We're seeing it across the nation. I'm definitely seeing it in my backyard. And so I am actually, because of everything that I'm seeing, the defaults, the subject to defaults where investors bought deals they should have never bought in the first place, all of these things, I'm calling an emergency masterclass on the topic of how to do a subject to deal safely. It's going to be August 17th, 2024 in New Orleans, and it's going to be a more intimate setting, kind of like a masterclass mastermind, where it's going to be in a house, not a big hotel room. And guys, it's important that you learn how to do these deals safely. My goal is to get you in there for an entire day, teach you as much as I possibly can, and give you a manual to walk away with. If you're interested in more information on how to do these deals safely, go ahead, go to CourtneyFricke.com for more information, or DM me the word subject to masterclass. Y'all stay safe out there. Hey, welcome to the Strategic Success Podcast. I'm your host, Courtney Fricke. Thanks for tuning in. Hey, you guys, welcome to the Strategic Success Podcast. So I am looking forward, this is my friend Larissa Greene with Advanta IRA. So we're going to jump into a conversation today. This is a topic that I think investors may have heard about, but very possibly they haven't. They think they know what it is. They either, have heard of, some version with it, or they get it and they use it. So my idea is, let's kind of pull back the mask. Let's talk about what these retirement accounts are that people can do these, real estate investments with, and kind of jump into there. So tell us a little bit about who you are, who you're associated with, and what all do y'all do.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me, Courtney.
Sure.
So my name is Larissa Greene, and I've been with Advanta for almost 13 years now.
Okay.
And Advanta IRA has actually been in business a little over 21 years.
Okay.
And as long as we've been in business, we've been doing the same thing. So we're a self-directed IRA administrator, or what people like to term that as a third-party administrator.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a lot of words for just very simply, we do record keeping for IRAs that hold private investments. And so instead of something typical like a brokerage firm, we're really just filling the gap in the industry. We're holding things that they won't. So we don't compete with them or anything like that. We don't hold anything publicly traded. We open the account, you find the investment, we help you get it done in the name of the IRA. And that bookkeeping is so important because it's proper titling on any investments, it's receiving income, it's paying expenses if they apply to the asset. And so we're, just very simply bookkeepers for retirement accounts that hold private investments.
I think that's the first time I've ever heard it explained that way. So that's good. So, because most people, when they hear IRA, 401k, they're thinking, they're thinking the Charles Schwab, they're thinking that,
Yes.
Stock market, things like that. So, but you guys deal in a very different segment of the market.
Mm-hmm.
What do you guys deal in?
It's really, there's so many things. And so, what I like to say is a lot of time the sky's the limit when you're looking at something that's self-directed. There are very few things that the IRS says you can't do. And so instead, I like to say if it's an arm's length investment, if it's for growth in your retirement account, it's probably something you can do. So typically you're going to hear the term real estate IRA, for example, and that's very common. People open an account so that they can invest in real estate in so many different structures. It could be a limited partnership and syndication type of situation. They could literally buy 123 Main Street, for example. There's a lot of private lending through these accounts, but it goes all the way from there to things like cryptocurrency, gold and silver bars. And then we see really unique investments too, like movie projects, for example.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So it can really be all over the place. Most commonly it's real estate based.
Well, so you guys deal in private and you those words you use, right? Private investments.
Private, yeah.
Because the public stuff, like, so for example, if someone went to one of those that I named earlier, they would go there and they'd say, hey, I have a 401k or an IRA. they're generally going to get options like the stock market,
Mhm.
maybe some annuities or something, or some they might even, like, if they say I want to do real estate, they may say, well, here's a REIT,
Right.
you
Yes.
know, something like that, right? So very different. Now let's talk about when you say a self-directed IRA, or something like that. Talk to me about what those products look like that you guys have,
Mhm.
so we can start to kind of get an idea around what these are for
Mhm.
folks who maybe haven't heard of them before.
Yeah, absolutely. So, whenever we talk about a self-directed IRA, people are like, well, I don't have that type of account. But we're actually not talking about the account type when we say self-directed. We're talking about the type of asset. But an IRA is an IRA, regardless of where you hold it, as long as you open the account correctly. So, traditional, Roth, SEP, simple, these are all types of IRA accounts, and we can hold any of those because they're IRAs. Then, when we throw self-directed in there, we're just talking about the type of asset that it holds. So, a lot of times people will look at our application to open an account and they'll say, well, I wanted the self-directed one and I don't see that on here. But really, they just choose the type of IRA, but all of them are going to be self-directed. So I like to say if it ends in IRA, it can be self-directed. And then there's other types of accounts too. So if you have a Roth with a brokerage firm, you would simply have a Roth with us as well. If you have a traditional, you would open a traditional. Pretty typically, I mean, you can make some changes. You can go to an employer based IRA if you're self employed, like a SEP or a simple or a solo 401k. We can help you with any of those. But truly, if it's qualified funds for retirement, we can help you with that. But we also hold health savings accounts and education savings accounts. And the reason, just very simply, is the IRS says the rules for self directing those are exactly the same. So we can help with the bookkeeping on those as well.
So choose. So if someone has an IRA, a 401k, an HSA, or the last one, the education one, what's the acronym for it?
So
CISA?
CISA, people call it ESA, CISA. Coverdell is also
Okay.
another way it's called, but yeah, it's all the same account.
So if folks have those elsewhere, they can most likely convert it or
Mhm.
potentially convert it to self-directed.
Yeah.
So right now they're using it with, maybe, funds, stocks, whatever.
Right.
They can now, they can consider it for this. Okay.
Yes, they can. And just the biggest difference between a lot of times people say to me, well, we have a 529 plan. That's actually different than a CISA. And so a 529 plan, as far as I'm aware, can't be self-directed. There are some new rules with the Secure Act 2.0 where you can take a 529 plan and move it to a Roth IRA, but there's very specific rules for that type of conversion. So right now, a 529 cannot go to a CISA.
Okay.
So you usually will typically know if you have a 529 versus the CISA because they're different types of accounts.
Okay. So, when I first got really made aware of this, my first encounter was I had people who, I was looking for private money, and I would come across a lot of folks who maybe didn't have cash in the bank. They maybe didn't have like a CD coming up that they could convert or something, but what they did have was, 401k. And that was where they were most liquid because maybe they worked for the power company for 20 years and now they're retired.
Yeah.
And, or, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
I remember having dinner with someone, and it was Mexican. I remember I had the chip almost from it, and they're like, "Yeah, about $1 million." And I was like, I almost dropped it. It was like it was a whole. I remember it very vividly. I had no idea that the person who had like close to $1 million in it, but it was because they had worked for the employer, and the employer matched it, and they did a good job contributing all those years, and now they're retired, and they wanted to grow it.
Yeah.
And so I was finding that most of these people were more, I don't want to say liquid, but they had more capital, there than in the bank, CDs, whatever, to where that they could lend. So my first introduction was I actually helped people convert theirs from wherever it was into self-directed so they could lend on my deals. And so I started learning with you guys. And so as you were talking about that 529 plan, it's obvious things can be, they have some intricate details of what you can and can't do.
Right.
But that's why I've always utilized you guys as a resource when someone starts looking like a good candidate. I say, hey, look, I don't know necessarily all the rules or the current rules, but I know someone who does. And so, I'd connect them with you guys and they'd kind of get, talking with you guys of, hey, this is my situation. Can I convert it to, self-directed? Basically, I have this. Can it now equal this? And you guys have done a great job helping them set up accounts and get those things rolling. So talk to me about, who is this a good fit for?
So the really great thing about a self-directed IRA is that it can fit so many people because just as you explained, a lot of people have an old employer plan. It's just sitting, it's not earning, they're not really sure what to do with it. People will say, I'm a little embarrassed to say I'm not even sure, who it's with right now because it's changed so many times or whatever. And that happens all the time. I tell people, don't be embarrassed about that. That happens when your money sits and you're not really sure how to move it or where to move it to.
Well, and
That
someone else is
happens.
managing it.
Yes,
And so
exactly.
it's not like it's a account you're managing personally.
Yes, that you have to watch it, it just happens. And so that's okay. But it can be rolled over to an IRA and you have some choices at that time. It can, if it's all pre-tax, it can stay pre-tax, it can go seamlessly into a traditional IRA. And then you can invest it, but it can also be converted to a Roth IRA. So if you want like after tax growth, for example, you'll hear a lot of people talk about the power of a Roth. It's not always a good fit for every single person, but it can work in your strategy. And the really great thing about a self-directed IRA is you can have as many IRA accounts as you'd like. And so this is not an all or nothing strategy. If you're,
Sure.
just starting to learn, if you want to do one small deal and see if it's a good fit for you, you can do that. You can just move over what you want to self-direct. You
Right.
don't have to leave cash in the account once the investment is made. And so if you say, okay, this deal is coming up and I need X amount of dollars, you can just move over that amount. Now, if you're dealing with an old employer plan, sometimes you have to make arrangements because they're going to say, oh, you have to take all of it because we don't want to manage your money if you're going to roll some of it out. And so you might have to move some of it to an IRA with them, and then you can move some of it to an IRA with us. But as far as moving money into the account, it can be for any amount for any deal that you're looking at. So I had some people buy private stock for a brand new company. It was just a few $1,000s, and they're like, hey, we don't want to move 50,000. We just want to move a few thousand for this stock purchase. And that's absolutely fine. So we help them set up the account. They determine how much they're moving over so that they can do this deal. And so when they make that investment, we don't require them to leave money in this account. So if the stock purchase was 2,000, they can just move 2,000 over. They can pay our fees with a credit card so that they don't have a cash balance in this account. They're literally 100% invested.
Yeah. So as I mentioned, people, they may be wanting to use this because that's what they have. They have a previous, type of retirement account from previous employer, or maybe they just have one they set up with, on their own, right? That they've been maybe managing on their own, through stocks. My partner has that. They have it with stocks and stuff like that. And so now we're like, okay, what would it look like for us to get it to a point where maybe it can earn greater rewards? Not rewards or returns, but I guess rewards feels the same.
Yeah.
At the same time,
Yeah.
in real estate, right?
Yeah.
Because that's what our household knows the most, right? And we can kind of control and manipulate the most. And so, it's people who have these type of accounts. I mentioned earlier, I've been able to help people convert so they can do private lending, in various things. But I know it even gets to these other factors, and we'll kind of talk through that. But you mentioned something traditional IRA and a Roth IRA. I know this is something that is very important for people to understand. So what do you mean when you say traditional Roth? You started explaining a little bit, but let's kind of isolate that.
So you really have two categories of accounts. You have these pre-tax accounts where you have this benefit. It's almost like a current tax benefit, meaning that you typically are going to get a deduction for making contributions to that. Not everybody, but most people will get deductions for those contributions. And that's a current benefit because when you make that contribution at the end of the year, you file your taxes and you tell your tax professional, hey, I made this contribution, so you can get that deduction.
So that's currently what I do.
Okay.
Right? So, and I think this might help give people like put a little flesh to it.
Sure.
So I set up, so I have a S corp that I do my flips, my wholesales, or any type of like the active income stuff through.
Sure.
And I'm the only employee. I don't have any other employees, nothing like that. And so I get a W-2 from that company. And so one of the things we did when I had a good year and we needed some tax saving options for deductions, we set up an account and I contributed to it and basically got the deduction for that year. Like it literally was down to the wire. Let's do this, at the 11th hour. Type of thing. It was like my CPA was like, go do this right now. I was like, okay.
Yes.
Right. And so obviously I reached out, I said, hey, I got to do this. And we rolled it over. So, so explain what that looks like So mine's a solo 401k.
Mhm.
And so explain kind of like what that looks like.
So those contributions, now the solo 401k is really cool because you're making employer contributions, and they can all be pre-tax. And so you can get the tax benefits really as, wearing both hats. You get to make this contribution as yourself as the employee and get the tax deduction. You can do it as the employer and get a tax deduction for the business. Very cool.
Yeah.
But the other cool thing about a solo 401k is you can also make Roth contributions. And this is very similar to a Roth IRA. The biggest difference between the contributions in a solo 401k plan versus a Roth IRA is really going to be the amount you can make each year. And so with a Roth IRA, with a Roth solo 401k, when you make those contributions, you get no deduction. So you make that contribution, there's no deduction on your annual tax filing, but the benefit is now that it grows tax free. So pre-tax over here in this bucket, it's going to grow tax deferred. That's still really cool. You get to kick the tax can down the road, as I like to say. And at some point, when you start taking distributions at retirement, you're going to pay taxes on the amount you distribute. And of course, the IRS eventually wants to get there. So if you don't take distributions at any point, they're going to say, okay, when you reach a certain age, we're going to require you to take distributions so that we have some of that taxable income.
Right.
They keep pushing that age back. So good news for us when we get there. Who knows what age it'll be?
Yeah.
But right now it's 73. It's going to be 75. So it's being pushed.
Yeah.
But with a Roth contribution, you don't have to take a required minimum distribution. So there's a little bit of a benefit there. But if you plan on taking distributions at retirement, then maybe that doesn't matter to you necessarily. But for estate builders, they're kind of always looking for, okay, how do I keep from taking from that so that, my kids, my grandkids can have that account when I'm gone and not pay taxes on it, right?
Yeah.
But one or the other might make sense for different people at different times.
Yeah.
A lot of times you'll hear people say, you have to have a Roth, it has to be Roth contributions because of that tax-free growth, right? So you get that really great benefit. However, you just talked about a personal situation where you needed that deduction. It made sense for you. A really cool thing about these accounts is it's not one or the other. You can make them work for you when it makes sense. So you can have a Roth where you make contributions to it. It grows tax free. And then one day you might say, you know what, this year I made way too much money. One, you might not be able to contribute directly to a Roth IRA because it has income limits for contributions.
But you can open up a different.
But you can open a traditional and get a deduction on your taxes. Or now, if you're self employed, you can look to a self employed based plan like you did and say, okay, well, now I want to have a 401k, a SEP IRA, a simple IRA, make a contribution, get a deduction, and have that tax deferred growth. So a lot of these accounts can actually work together, which is really cool.
And a lot of high salaried individuals look to these retirement accounts to really lower their income, right? To stop from those tax issues. And so if you're in the camp where you're like, hey, I have income issues where I need, tax issues, right? I need tax planning.
Yeah.
Even as a self-employed person where, it's just me, right? We were able to set it up to where, I was able to get that deduction, and I'm basically creating a retirement myself. Because as self-employed people, you don't have retirement unless you plan for it.
Yeah.
Now, some of us have rentals, and that's a little bit different, but it's one of those things. And look, flippers and wholesalers, this is important because if they're making high income, presumably that's highly taxed, this is where it's a great opportunity, especially if you don't have rentals. But we should talk about the rental part. But the reality there is, it's a good opportunity for that, right?
Yeah.
And so this is good for folks who, they could have, maybe not being flippers or wholesalers. They could be, they own, a title company, or they own, a nail salon or a restaurant or whatever, right? And so there's different things that could go there. But at the end of the day, it could be a lawn care company or whatever. Those things can kind of vary. But at the end of the day, so there's that part.
Yep.
And I did that again as a tax saving measure and whatnot. But it saved me from the tax today. But as you said, eventually I'll be taxed on it. And so some people, they do have that argument on a traditional account. It's like the idea that, do you want to get taxed? What do they say? Do you want to get taxed on the acorn or on the tree?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and so that's why there's argument for the Roth, which is, you don't get the discount. You don't get the tax like deduction when you put it in today,
Right.
but you're putting in a small amount. And if you grow it, you're not getting taxed on the bigger amount, or you're not getting taxed later in life when your net worth is higher,
Yeah.
type of thing. So I hear the argument for both sides.
Yes, it is. And that's why I'm really careful when people say everybody should have a Roth IRA. I don't necessarily agree with that. I mean, I think it depends on where you are in your life, what you do for a living, how much earned income you
Sure.
have. But there's also ways to look at these different strategies and really make them work for you. So
Yeah.
if you have an investment coming up, let's say, and you're like, this is really going to, be a home run investment, maybe now's the time to open a Roth IRA and make a contribution for that investment
Yeah.
so that one will grow tax free. And especially with a solo 401k, you have all of this ability to decide what is going to be Roth, what is going to be pre-tax within that account. And you can even do record keeping where you're using the Roth funds for a specific investment.
That's interesting.
So you have a lot
So you
of
can say,
flexibility.
hey, these are not being taxed. Let's use this to hit that home run with.
Right.
And so, okay, so those are some important parts. So like, okay, so I've got my solo 401k, and yeah, it's got money in it. I actually have it out working and all that. But there's nothing also stopping me from at some point saying, hey, could I eventually convert that, or I could open up other accounts. And so that's a huge part, right? Like, is understanding that it's not, you get one shot at this or whatever. Like, there's a lot of options there.
Yes.
So, all right. So what are your suggestions for a beginner? What are some first steps? So like, okay, because, a lot of people get into this for the tax benefits, right?
Yep.
And the long-term play,
Mhm.
right? It's, hey, tax benefits today, or, tax free growth on these investments, which is a big deal.
Mhm.
If anyone has ever done one deal and had survived one tax return, they know how big of a deal, like you need both. You can't just say I did a deal, yeah, but if you did it yesterday, you don't know the real ramifications until you go through your tax return.
That's true.
So taxes are such a huge part of everything we do as investors, right? Uncle Sam's our biggest partner, whether we like him or not. We can't really kick him out of the bed. So a huge part of this is people are doing it for tax reasons, but also it's retirement accounts, right?
Right.
And so I think there's a statistic out there. How much money is in retirement accounts?
Oh my goodness. The last time
doesn't
I
have to be
saw it,
exact.
yes, it's trillions.
Trillions. And so
Yeah.
that's huge, because again, most people, again, they have that, their liquidity or their wealth is in their retirement account, maybe from
Yes.
an employer,
Mhm.
all of those things. So, but for investors especially, this is a great opportunity to, number one, have a forced retirement account for yourself,
Yep.
or a way to create opportunities to either avoid tax today, minimize tax today, or build something and grow it tax free over time. So if someone's a beginner, what are their first steps? Like, what are some suggestions you have?
I would say we have so much education. It's
Yeah.
always going on. We have 2 webinars a week. If you know specifically the type of investment that you want to learn about in a self-directed IRA, you can browse our YouTube channel, our video library, but we also refresh those. So, for example, we usually talk about private lending and what that structure looks like twice a year. So the videos are always fresh. We talk about partnering with IRAs and non-IRA funds. So I literally just spoke to somebody that said, is that very complicated? And we talked about what it looks like, but then I sent them the webinar we did that really helps you understand what that structure looks like. And it depends in a structure like that, if you're partnering with yourself, for example, which could be a gray area, or if you're just partnering with a friend who's not using an IRA, and how does that structure work? So I would say start with the education portion, because I think that there's a learning curve here, but it also doesn't have to be terribly complicated. So the second thing I would say is choose a deal that's not terribly complicated, because I think we all go through that period where we say, well, can I bring the IRA into this, but then I need this other part and this other thing, and the
Yeah.
planets have to align to make this work. Maybe that's not the first deal. Maybe the first deal is something a little more straightforward. The first one that I did with my 401k, and remember, I'm helping people do this every day. I see very complicated deals. But when it came to signing on the dotted line for myself, it was intimidating. So I
Sure.
just did something very vanilla. First mortgage on a rental property, something that I could drive by, something that I understood the value of,
Yeah.
not so complicated.
So you lent for someone else on
Yes.
their rental property.
Yep.
And it was probably someone you knew,
Yep.
vetted, all that in a sense where it's like you were
Very
comfortable.
comfortable.
Yeah, it
Yep.
was local deal.
Yep,
Yeah.
local.
Yeah.
Yep. The numbers were very easy. It wasn't something where I had to go, okay, now what is the, what is the
Explain
rate
this
of
language to
return?
me.
Yes, exactly. So my very first deal was very easy. So I would say, a lot of times I talk to people and they call me and they have this
Sure.
really creative deal, but they haven't.
Split up on paper, and you're like, what?
Yes, yes. And they'll say, will this work? So then we start, complicated deal brings a complicated structure in an IRA. So then we start talking about a tax that could apply, unrelated business income tax. We talk about non-recourse loans. We talk about structuring in entities because you have so many partners. And then they say, ooh, that feels like a lot. And then I say, this maybe isn't the deal for your IRA, but you have to decide for yourself.
Right.
And that person will come back to me 6 months later and say, I found the deal for my IRA. So maybe that one didn't make sense, but all of a sudden they walk into a deal that it's maybe a little more straightforward for the first one in the IRA.
Sure.
It doesn't always work out that way. Sometimes people come with these complicated deals and they're good to, they're taking notes, they're watching the webinars and they're like, I'm going to do this, and they're ready to go.
Sure.
But that's not for everybody.
Sure.
And so a lot of times people come to me with a more complicated deal and that's not the right one. But then months down the line, they say, I found the right one. This one is going to work. And as you get used to the paperwork for a self-directed IRA, as you get used to vetting your own deals, because that's a big part of it. We talk about self-direction as a type of asset, but self-direction describes what you're going to be doing. You're going to be self-directing that IRA. We're going to say, is this the deal you want to do? And you sign on that line and say, yep, this is the deal I want to do. So then the next one might be a little more complicated and it might move up from there.
Yeah. And I think that's important because you guys aren't in the role of saying this is a good investment.
Right.
Your role is more helping with the technical
Paperwork.
side, the paperwork. Yeah. And so that's really critical. I heard something of a custodian company that was like sending out a list of available deals. And I felt that was like, wait, right? Like that, like, and someone was asking about that. And I was like, man, like,
we're not vetting those deals, so we don't do that.
Exactly. Like the thing there. So it's kind of like saying like, here's a Craigslist of,
Right.
list of deals or whatever. But like, that's y'all's role is you guys are there to assist with the paperwork and that part, but it's like you're not saying, yeah, Susie, a good one to lend to, or hey, 123 Main Street is worth this. We ran the comps and we know.
Right.
Or oh yeah, we went and walked it. We think this is gonna be a stellar deal for you.
Right.
Like that's not y'all's role.
It's not. I would say, we don't put borrowers and lenders together, and people say, well, how do I find the deals? I just spoke to somebody about 2 weeks ago and he's like, I finished with the deal that I came to you guys for. Now I want another deal. And he's like, how do I, who else are your investment providers? So we work with a lot of investment providers, but we never share those names. Those people come to us because they're using a self-directed IRA as a tool, whereas you said it perfect. It's a very liquid asset. Retirement accounts tend to be the most liquid asset we have.
Yeah.
And so when investment providers are raising capital, they just let their investors know, hey, you can use an IRA and we know somebody that can help you with that.
Yeah.
But we would never go back and say, oh, here's all the investment providers we work with, because we need you to bring the deal to us. And that's part of us being arm's length, a third party administrator. We just don't get involved in the deals in that way.
Yeah, you're unbiased. You're like, yeah, we're not going to link clients together.
Yeah,
that makes sense. All right, so those are some thoughts for a beginner. So they should get educated. I definitely think it's a new language and a new way of thinking about certain deals and things like that. So it's like get and the best piece of advice I got when I first got started was go watch the game before you play the game, because you might get hurt playing the game if you don't know.
Oh, that's
right?
I like that.
And so it's like, okay, get around people who are actively doing deals in self-directed accounts, right? So I think you guys have, is it once or twice a month you have that Friday morning?
Yes,
What's it called?
it's Pitch, Promote, and Prosper,
Yes.
and it's the last Friday of every month
Okay.
at lunchtime Eastern time.
Yeah.
And that is a way for people we're putting like-minded investors together where we can still do that and be compliant. So it's basically, we don't record it, we don't share numbers, we don't share information. If you join and you want to share, you're welcome to, or you can just sit and listen, and sometimes people do.
Yeah.
And
so it's kind of like a happy hour, but you guys aren't,
facilitating.
Yes. But people can come there and say, hey, I had this deal, I'm looking for money, or someone can come there and say, hey, look, I've got a movie project I'm looking
I'm raising capital
or whatever.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so if they want to find out more about that, Is that because I know you guys, if they sign up, they can get emails, and that's just through you guys' website.
That's right. Yep.
And so that's for any of the webinars you talked about, but also
Yep,
any
stuff like that.
else. Yeah.
Networking. Yep, sure.
All right. So they should educate all that, and then once they feel like, hey, I'm getting close to pull the trigger, go ahead and set up the account. And it's important to know that setting up the account may take time depending on some things. What does that look like?
Yes. So we can have the account open in one day. So on that side, yep, you turn in your paperwork, your account gets open, but it's funding that account that can take time. And that's where, I just spoke to somebody this morning that said, I really want to get this going. It's an old employer plan. Unfortunately, old employers plans take about 30 days to fund. And so, they wanted to do a deal in a week. And I was like, it's all dependent on that employer plan. So just knowing sort of what that process looks like is very helpful. Usually I kind of give people an idea, but ultimately I say call that plan administrator and find out if they'll wire funds, because typically employers' plans won't wire funds. But if they will, man, that'll just move things right along. It just depends.
Yeah.
But typically something like that, they'll want to write a check payable to the IRA, but they'll mail it to that individual because that's the address they feel comfortable using.
Yeah.
And then that individual will forward that check on to us. And so that's all stuff that just, it takes time.
Especially with the mail these days.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, okay, that's important though, because okay, hey, you're learning, you have a good idea. Now you're starting to look at deals. It's kind of like the idea of you have to go get pre-approved before you go looking for a house with a realtor. Hey, if you're going to start doing these, you need to at a certain point set up your account and give it time versus let me go shop for deals.
Yes.
Whatever that may look like. So, all right. So then they set up an account with you guys. And then, now let's talk about the second type of person. So the first one is, hey, I'm new to this. What do I do? Second one is the person who, so I opened up my first account. Again, it was kind of like that. I was motivated for a tax reason. I set it up. And then for an entire year I had it and I didn't do anything with it. So shame on me for that part, right? Because it's self-directed. I didn't direct it.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So if someone like when I did that, so I didn't do a deal for a year and then I did, my very first deal was 9 deals at once. I was like, good Lord. Of course I did. And they were quite complex, all this stuff. So, Hey guys, Courtney Fricke here. We've got Aussie Steve. And look, if you have a deal that needs to get moved, Southeast Louisiana, even in South Mississippi, we're your folks. We are the largest dispo company, really in the greater New Orleans area, even Southeast Louisiana. We have great contacts in South Mississippi as well. Steve, why do we move more deals than others?
Just we're very deep in this market, so Greater New Orleans can be really confusing for national wholesalers. The comps are hard. We change block for block. We got flood zones. We get a lot of hurricanes and the likes, and just a lot of the national platforms don't have the buyers on their list. So we are deep with buyers, but we're deep with relationships, which is really important in this market. So we love JVing with out-of-state investors.
Like I said, we do a ton of business with other investors. So go to homebuyerlouisiana.com/Courtney, fill out the information. We'll get in touch with you and we'll move this deal along. For someone like me, if I'm not, or maybe I've opened an account, but I'm not very active with it, what are some of your suggestions or advice for those folks?
So I definitely would suggest networking. So like-minded investors, people who, you want to do the deals that they're doing, again, making sure you're doing your own due diligence. But, you'll see a lot of people that are newer or, we actually have a webinar that we did. Well, I did one with Bill Cook, of course, where he talks about, smaller balance accounts and things like options. But I do my own webinar on that as well, because I feel like sometimes when you talk about something like an option, a real estate option, that's a more advanced strategy.
Sure.
And so when you're looking at a smaller balance account, what can you do with it? And so we talk about things like precious metals. You don't need a ton of money in an account. Tax liens. You don't need a ton of money in an account. Or very simply partnering with a friend, a spouse, putting IRA money together, or partnering with a like-minded investor. Yeah. So when you look at something like just a couple $1,000s, well, what can you do with that? Well, you can do a private money deal with that. I've done some deals where it's smaller amounts of money. I've partnered with people who have the larger amounts of money, sure. Or I look at something like earnest money. Sometimes people just don't want to dig into their pocket for that earnest money and they're willing to pay, sometimes it's a percentage and sometimes it's just money back to the account. It just depends on your state and what your state allows as far as usury goes. But, we see earnest money deals, stuff like that too. So there's always a way to get that money out there. Sometimes I say, when you have a smaller balance, you might just have to hit the ground running. You have to just look a little harder for those deals, but it
Sure.
doesn't mean that it's impossible.
I always talk about there being a triangle. The triangle has, so if we're looking at the three, it's time,
Mhm.
it's money, and it's knowledge.
Mhm.
And so when you're tight on one, you have to pick up usually in the others, right?
Mhm.
And so folks who don't have a lot of money, or that you can't have an account with no money in it,
Mhm.
right? You do have to contribute to it,
Mhm.
and before you make a single investment. So it can't be I have no money, but I'm gonna go do an investment deal and it'll produce money. So you have to have money, right? But hey, like for example, I have $1,000 in mine, and I've been actively putting it out there because I believe I can do something with 1,000, right?
Mhm.
And so if you, I know because I'm low on the money on that part because the rest of the money is out working currently, then I know I have to both the time part, I have to put my effort into finding that type of deal because there's not as
Yes.
many. And then also I have to use the knowledge part to say, okay, what might be good opportunities for this?
Mhm.
And so if someone's lacking, for example, they have a low balance on the money part, then they need to go watch those videos about the small dollar accounts,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
They've got to spend the time getting around folks who have, those types of deals.
Mhm.
And then same thing, I think people who let it get stagnant, part of my issue was the knowledge part on the best fit
Mhm.
for those, right? I opened it up because it was a tax reason, but at the same time, it has to be directed by me.
Yeah.
So what are your thoughts if someone's like, hey, my money's in an IRA and it is, in the stock market and it's making XYZ.
Mhm.
Um, when they move it, can you talk about what happens when they move it and if it
Mhm.
sits?
Yes. Yes. So what I like to tell people is when you start actively looking for deals, that's the time to move the account. If you're still in the learning phase, yeah, we'd love to earn your business. We want to help you get that account open, but your account is going to incur fees. It's a cash only fee. To have it just sitting, it's $25 a quarter. And so, let's get it open when you're going to really start looking for those deals
Mhm.
because you don't incur that fee to start with. And so if it's going to sit for a year, and not,
Sure.
then it's not going to earn, it's not going to lose, but it does have fees. It's going to carry fees. So usually I would say, okay, well, if you're still in the learning phase, let me help you do that. I'll send you lots of information, join our webinars, ask me questions,
Right.
and sometimes that takes a little while and
Sure.
that's okay. But then when you're going to start actively looking for those investments, understanding your timeline, one, right? So the old employer plan is going to take about 30 days. So if you're going to start looking for investments, allow that amount of time. But if you have an existing IRA with one of the larger brokerage firms, typically that can be moved in a week, 2 weeks. Once your account is open, we can do a deal in 3 days.
Yeah.
And so if you're actively looking for deals, get your account open.
Yeah. So I think that's important, right? Because a lot of people get in that analysis paralysis or whatever. Now, going back to that triangle, you may have the money in your account.
Mhm.
For example, you moved it over, and let's just say you got 100 grand in your account. Um, and you know what are the best type of deals for it,
Mhm.
but you don't have the time.
Right.
And so that's where, again, getting in those like-minded rooms,
Yes.
because the deal's not going to hit you across the face saying, hey, invest in me, right? And so that's where you've got to look at these other parts. And so that's critical. Investing is a team sport. We have to have these other segments. And so now let's talk to the fun third group in my mind, which is what are some of your more advanced clients doing? So, okay, let's just say, people have opened up their accounts, they've gotten educated, they're actively doing deals, so they have the time, the knowledge, the money, they're moving deals. Now, let's talk about the people who they get all three,
Mhm.
right? What are some of the fun things you've seen done with retirement accounts?
We actually do a webinar usually twice a year on that as well. I mentioned movie projects. We actually had one, gosh, I don't know how many years ago it was now, maybe like 8 years ago. Here, they were raising capital in Tampa Bay. We had a longtime client reach out to us and say, hey, they're raising capital. Is this something we can do? And we were like, yeah. So because they did it, and then, the fund found out about it, they were like, we have other people that want to use IRAs. So we did a local movie project, and that was really cool. It was actually a pretty big movie, as far as I can remember. And then I was speaking at a local realtor office, and I mentioned that. And it just so happens that one of the realtors was running a film festival. So they invited me to go and speak there about raising capital through retirement accounts. So that was really cool. And we've seen people do things like flip airplanes. So that was really cool. And 18-wheelers, we've seen them do that.
Okay.
And
So like they bought a physical
plane. Yep.
with their
Retirement account.
retirement account.
Yep.
And so they bought low, sold high type of thing.
Yeah.
And then the proceeds
Went back to their retirement account. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Now, here's where all those rules kind of come in, because you want to make sure that, this is an arm's length transaction. So clients that have, done this sort of transportation idea, they can't house that. They can't fly it, drive it, store it, repair it. It has to all be arm's length transaction.
Yeah.
So, we've had clients reach out to us and say, okay, well, I'm in, an 18-wheeler, trucking type of business. And they were like, can I buy a rundown truck and repair it? And I was like, well, you can't repair it, but if you have, contacts in this industry, you have somebody that can help you store it, you're paying these people fair market value. And he was like, yep, let's do it, and did it in the IRA. We've seen people do that with cattle, alpaca, racehorses. I mean, you name it. We have clients invested in breweries and wineries, and so there's all kinds of things you can do with a retirement account. And you know how when you're like in that industry, your mind is always kind of working. So I like hear these commercials. I can remember one for like frozen yogurt where you own your own business and they drop the machine off in like a local mall and they service it and you pay a fee. And I'm like, an IRA can do that because there's a third party handling it all for you. So, there's lots of really cool things. We had a client invest in a sports team. So really, truly, the sky is the limit.
Because it's all being run by someone.
Yeah.
So speaking of, you mentioned precious metal earlier. I did a deal earlier this morning and I traded and I got these two. So I couldn't have done this because I'm in. So talk about even precious metal.
Yeah.
People love talking about gold and silver and stuff like that. So what does it look like? I know you mentioned that there's some rules. It has to be arm's length.
Yes.
So what does that look like for these?
Okay, so this deal couldn't have been done in your IRA because you have physical possession.
Yeah.
Yep, and I think that that's a big part of the confusion out there, because I feel like forever, even I saw those billboards that said hold your IRA gold at home. And we have always, Advanta has always taken the stance that that's not arm's length, but there was companies out there that were allowing it. And then there was this huge court case where the IRS clarified and they were like, oh, no. And if you want to look up that case, it's McNulty. But basically, there was a client of a self-directed IRA administrator holding an LLC and then holding their gold at home, storing their gold at home through the IRA. And the tax court deemed that was prohibited, unfortunately. Yeah. And so you're always looking for these transactions to be arm's length. And so, yes, you can invest in precious metals, but you're going to use a depository to hold them. You're never taking possession of them.
I'm not holding these. It's being stored in some vault, safe, whatever, somewhere.
Yes.
Hopefully not Fort Knox.
Right. So right. And basically what they're doing, and these depositories are very familiar with self-directed IRAs. They know that they're in receipt. When the client says, hey, I want to sell these, they say, oh, no. Call your self-directed IRA administrator, because they're very familiar with that.
Yeah.
It's a good relationship, but we don't choose the depository for you. Mm-hmm. You're going to choose it. We work with 8 different depositories because we know that they know how to hold the accounts and how to receive the precious metals and things of that nature. Yeah. So we can give you a list and then you say, okay, this is who I want to deal with. And that's same with things like cryptocurrencies and, all of those things. You want them to always be arm's length. And so if you said, oh, I own 123 Main Street in ABC LLC, which is my personal LLC, then we would say, well, you can't do any deals with 123 Main Street or ABC LLC because that would not be an arm's length transaction. Yeah. Not to say that you couldn't buy real estate or use an LLC, but all of these investments should be new to you and new to the IRA, which is super important.
Yeah, and so that's important. So when it comes down to doing a real estate deal, it has to be titled correctly. Mm-hmm. It has to the people you're doing it with, how you're funding it, all that stuff is so critical. Mm-hmm. And so that's where you guys come in to help make sure that the technical side, it's not like you guys are doing the actual title closing, mm-hmm. but you're working alongside everyone for that process.
We are, yeah.
All right, so that part's important. Now tell me a fun real estate story. What do you think?
A fun real estate story. Okay, well, I do have clients invested outside of the country in real estate. Yeah, I have clients invested in Panama and Costa Rica and India. And so I think those are really interesting to me. And people are always like, me and my partner Corey did a webinar we called Investing Without Borders, because I think people come to us and they think, well, US retirement, right? And the truth is, we have clients worldwide because it just has to be US based retirement account. And so we have clients, in China that work for a US based company, for example. So they have like a 401k. And so they can self direct that money when they retire from that company, or if the 401k allows them that flexibility. And so we have people call us all the time and they're like, but I can't invest outside the US, right? And we're like, no, you can. But again, self directed. So you want to make sure you understand what that country requires for you to make that investment. So a great example is Costa Rica, because they require you to have a Costa Rican formed entity in order to buy real estate in Costa Rica. And those aren't rules that we knew. The client, worked with an attorney that knew what that foreign investment was going to require. And they came to us and said, okay, first I have to establish this entity, fund that bank account, and then I can buy the real estate. So again, self-directed, bringing that information to us.
And we're just collaborating with the attorneys.
Yes, and whoever. And so another fun one I have is we have a client invested in crypts, and that is deeded real estate. If you didn't know, I didn't know. And
So wait, what is it in?
a crypt.
A crypt. What is a crypt?
So a crypt is a place where you bury somebody above ground, usually.
Okay, so we have those in New Orleans.
Yeah.
So I live in New Orleans, and because we're underground, we call them mausoleums.
Yes.
Very interesting.
Yes. So, and I
This is
didn't
a very good retirement plan.
Yes, yeah, right. So I didn't know that was considered deeded real estate, but a client called us and said, I have this opportunity to buy two
Of a
crypts.
lifetime.
Yes, two crypts side by side. And I want to buy those with my IRA because they're selling them at a discount. They just want to get rid of them. I don't know if the owner was like moving out of state and was like, oh, we're never going to use this. Yes. So he bought them at a discount, and of course he can't use them personally. But he held them for the appreciation and sold them. And so, that was literally something that he could do in an IRA, which we did a webinar following that called From Crypts to Cryptocurrency, which was super fun.
That's fun.
But we do see a lot of really unique investments.
Well, and I think that's huge because again, people always come down to like, hey, I don't have the money or that, but it's like, again, it's you've got to know where some potential opportunities where that money could come from and all that. So there's some good things. Now, I know I've heard a lot of like, hey, you want to be mindful of these rules. What are some general rules of thumb of like, what are some things to avoid when doing these types, when using self-directed accounts, retirement accounts for, especially on the real estate investment side?
So there's a lot of very black and white, and then you have some gray. And so very black and white, you can't invest with yourself personally. Or I should say you can't transact. And there's a little bit of a difference there between partnering and transacting. So you can't buy, sell, trade, provide services for your IRA. And then that includes your spouse, your parents and your grandparents, your children and your grandchildren, and then any spouses or business entities of those.
All right. So it's you and your spouse. So it's your parents and it's your kids. And then you said spouses or business partners, business entities.
For
example, if your kids had spouses or if they had businesses or something like that.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. And then where you get into gray areas, brothers, sisters, aunts, uncles, cousins, not expressly prohibited, but those transactions should be arm's length. So my brother opens a restaurant. He asked me if I want to buy stock in his new restaurant. Am I doing that because he's my brother, or am I making an investment because it's a good opportunity? Here is where it's a good time to get an attorney involved, have them set up the transaction, give it the green light, looking at something that could be prohibited. The other example that I like to give is, let's say that I own 123 Main Street in my IRA, and my brother says, you know what, I love 123 Main Street. I see that it's up for rent again. I'll pay regular fair market rent. We'll go into a lease like you normally would. All well and good on the surface. But if I was like, ooh, either my brother lives with me or I let him rent this place because nobody else will rent to him for whatever reason, he has evictions, whatever it is. Now we're talking about intrinsic value, and this could become a problem.
Kind of like if a parent said, hey, I want to go, my kid's going to college, let me go buy a property out there in my IRA and my daughter can stay in it.
Right.
So we'll have other roommates, but And so knowing that those things are kind of prohibited, let's talk about some other scenarios. What about wholesaling? Can someone wholesale in, so that's a contract, right? I go get a contract on 123 Main Street, and let's just say I'm going to make $20,000. Uncle Sam highly taxes that, and so is that black and white? Is that gray?
I feel like in recent years it's become black and white and not something you want to do in your IRA. I cannot recall if there is case law on that now. And a lot of times when it comes to an IRA, we're looking for case law to give us, draw the line in the sand on certain things that we felt were gray before. With wholesaling, that might be providing a service. There is a lot of very active things going on when you're wholesaling. And so it could be prohibited. There's where I would maybe bring in an attorney. I don't necessarily know if the windfall has anything to do with it, but more the service being provided. Although you would hear, and at Pete's class over the weekend, he talked about options and how you're putting in a little bit of money. And if that option is very long term, then you might look to add money to that option down the line to sort of reinstate the contract or whatever.
Well, yeah, like with a wholesale deal, you might put $500 earnest money. If that, a lot of wholesalers put $10, right? So you put in a little bit of earnest money, but if you put, let's just say you put in 500, but it turns to 20,000, that's a very small investment for a very large gain. And so what a lot of times get talks about, Pete, John Hire, you guys like talk about these, like you want to be careful when it's such a small investment that gets such a huge return that could be an issue.
Yeah, or trigger an audit, which even if they end up saying, okay, it's fine, do you want to be audited? Probably not.
Correct.
And so when you're looking at these deals again, this is the time where I would get an attorney involved. My partner Alex always says that, yeah, attorneys cost money, but it's probably in the grand scheme of that investment, a little bit of money for a good insurance policy. And, I would agree with that.
So one piece of advice I got when I got started was that basically there's these rules of what you can and can't not do, like who you can do it with, what can you do, what's gray, what's black and white. And I think a lot of people sometimes get worried when like they get the paralysis analysis of like, I'm scared I'm gonna do it wrong. People get so afraid of losing, right?
Yeah.
So let's talk about that. Worst case scenario, let's just say you biff it up, you get it wrong. What would that look like? And I guess maybe I'll tee it up. Someone suggested that, hey, if that's something that's really scaring you, there's a difference between opening up a self-directed IRA and a 401k. There's a difference between the consequences. What does that look like?
So in the IRA ceases to be a retirement account January 1 of the prohibited transaction. So let's say that you lent money to your parents and, it's discovered 5 years from now. Well, they're going to make you amend your tax return January 1 of the year of that transaction so that IRA is considered distributed that year. It's also excise tax. So there's this penalty and they determine what that excise tax is going to be and the penalty on the investment. And so, a lot of investors will use the term, it'll blow up your IRA.
So if you have 500,000 in your IRA, but you lent them only 100, it could blow up the whole 500.
As far as I understand it, yes.
Sure,
I haven't seen it done, so I don't know exactly what that would look like, but that is as far as I understand it, yes.
Yeah.
They distribute the IRA and then there's this excise tax and then there's penalties on top of that. And so it can be, pretty severe.
Yeah. Versus, so again, the advice I got was if you're so afraid of things going wrong, be mindful of an IRA. And consider going the 401k route, because if something were done wrong, again, I have 500,000 in my 401k. I lend 100 to my mom. What is
the penalty? Is just on the deal in the 401k, rather than on the account, and it's minimally. I mean, I don't want to downplay it. I think it's like 15%. However, I want to be careful with that because it also has a lot to do with when it's discovered. Yeah. So the penalties are going to get worse. If it's discovered later down the road.
Sure, it's compounding. Well, and so that was advice I got. Hey, Courtney, first learn about all this stuff, but then, hey, if you're going to open up one, a good one to open up is a solo 401k. Get out there, start learning, and as you get more proficient in it, doesn't mean that you can't go open up an IRA. You can do that, but maybe you just do less, more vanilla deals in those.
Sure.
Right? Yeah. That, you're dotting all your I's and crossing all your T's. Still trying to do that your best on the 401ks, but if you're ever like, let's put in there, right?
Yeah, and I know a lot of investors will look to that, and I think the biggest thing though is it can sound really scary, like this is going to be distributed, this is prohibited, IRAs get audited, and I know that it exists out there.
Yeah.
But in my 13 years with Advanta,
Right.
I only saw one IRA audited, and it wasn't because of the IRA's transaction. It was a personal audit that
That
led
include
to
everything, yeah.
everything. So I just want to put it out there that I'm not seeing that left and right. And
That is a very good
also,
point.
yeah, and then also remembering that whole arm's length transaction thing is going to be super important here. If you come to me and you say, I think this is an investment, then I don't feel like it is. If you have to kind of like waffle over it, then it's probably not an investment. You're trying to, do something nice for somebody, or you're trying to look at something, where, maybe even, a brother, sister, aunt, uncle, cousin is involved and not necessarily prohibited. But now you're saying, but they really need the
Great.
money. And now you're going into, is this really an investment? One of my partners will say when we're talking about prohibited transactions, where, in that scenario where I said, okay, well, I'll lease this property to my brother, would I, say to him, okay, well, now I'm going to evict you. Would I evict my brother? If I wouldn't, then it's probably not an investment. And so that might be a good
Rule of thumb,
gauge,
yeah.
as to when you're looking at investments. And if you feel like you're walking, in the black and white,
Would I lend and not foreclose? All that,
yes,
yeah.
yeah, then I think that is a very good way to look at a deal,
Yeah. I think these are all really good points. And so some reminders here is, you want to get educated. You want to get around like-minded folks.
Mhm.
You want to kind of know some general rules so that you can know what's a good fit, what's not a good fit. And take action, right? You want to make sure that this money is actively earning and moving and all that. You guys are great resource as far as, helping with the paperwork and the technical side. And you guys know this is what you guys do
Mhm.
day in and day out. And so another big part there though is so many people don't realize when it comes on this, because of the prohibited transactions, it's like you do need to have other people, and like, so this is where the word financial friends really kind of came out, and where I learned it, where, I've got so many friends who have self-directed retirement accounts,
Mhm.
and it's in essence, we're lending, to each other because we know, like, and trust each other. We've seen each other operate as investors, because hey, they can't do it with their family, I can't do it with my family, so hey, I'm going to lend to you, you're going to lend to them, they're going to lend to me, in that sense. But it's getting around knowing people who do this, who have, again, like mindsets. We know how they operate their word,
Yes.
do they follow up and do what they say they're going to do, all those things. So getting in those right rooms can open you up to the opportunities. There's even the exchanger rooms where, I mean, you help run the one on Denny's, you volunteer your time. I know they, Wayne's on meeting. I mean, just meetings like that where there's active deals being pitched, you can bring your idle funds and get them working.
Mhm.
But it's also important to know, that do due diligence.
Yes.
Because at the end of the day, I mean,
It's your money.
it's your money.
Yeah.
It ultimately comes down to you. You guys aren't going to be vetting, the borrower on your a loan someone's lending, right?
Mhm.
So that's good. Any final words? I'm just advised, whether it's someone looking to get started, someone who's continuing on their journey with their, retirement accounts.
Yeah, I think mostly I would tell people, don't be afraid to reach out to us and ask the questions. You don't have to open an account the day you speak to us, or even 3 months from now. A lot of times I talk to people and then a year later I talk to somebody. I mean, I saw people at the class at Pete's this weekend that said, I still need to get that account open. Please don't forget to give me a call. And I saw them last year at Pete's, and that's okay. Like, this is, a long-term strategy. It's a long-term game, and it's something that you should learn about. So don't be afraid to reach out to us and get started in learning. I mean, I always joke that when I started at Advanta, and Courtney and I are literally sitting in the room where I worked until they had an office for me. I didn't know what we did for weeks. I was actually, my background was in real estate, and they wanted me to review contracts, which I was very comfortable with. But as far as understanding how IRAs are invested in these things, I really didn't have a clue. So I was reviewing contracts and putting them with account numbers. But as far as understanding what those accounts were for, I really didn't know. And so my supervisor, Scott, who is still with us, I would sit in on his webinar. So it would just be him in this room recording a webinar, and I'd be sitting right there listening, taking notes, learning about it. Yeah. And I think that's where everybody should start.
Sure. There's a topic that we talked about. I want to dive deep into it just real quick before we wrap up here. You do CE classes for real estate agents.
Yes.
If someone's a real estate agent, how might you guys be able to help them help their clients?
So I feel like that is sort of what we term mutual marketing, where we say, hey, if you're working with investors, you're finding them houses, you're working with them on their contracts and things of that nature. If you let them know that they can use a retirement account, that just opens up a whole new pot of money that they had no idea that they had access to. So you might have your favorite investor client that buys one house a year because that's where, all of a sudden, their money builds up, they're ready to put it back out to work, whatever it might be, or they're, selling. But if you said, hey, did you know you can use IRA funds? Now maybe they're buying two houses a year through you, and I think that that is such an advantage, but of course for their own retirement too, because that's what they see every day.
Yeah.
They're on the inside of those really great deals, those pocket listings, those things
Sure.
like that, or maybe the house that can't sell, something like that. And they're approached and somebody says, we need to do a creative deal, knowing about these deals where there's private money lenders out there who are willing to lend,
Yeah.
people who are looking to buy those houses that are maybe struggling on the market a little bit, things of that nature. So I think it's a really good tool in the tool belt of somebody who is ready to learn about it. And we also do mutual marketing pieces where we can put your picture, your info on, an infographic so that when you do out your monthly mailers, you can say, and did you know you can buy real estate in an IRA? And we're going to help you with that language.
Well, I think that's huge. Because when it comes with real estate agents, having more tools, just like with investors, more tools in your tool belt, you can solve more problems, serve more people, right?
Yes.
And so a huge part to that though is it's actually interesting. I actually have one of my private lenders is a real estate agent. They had a previous employer who had a matched 401k, and they rolled it over here. They then went and became a realtor full time. That's when we met. They went ahead, rolled it over, and when we met, they're like, look, I just don't get the deal flow, right? And so one of the things we did is as we built a relationship, we sat down, we said, hey, what's your goal to grow this out? What do you want that to look like? And so we've done a number of deals together now, and because they have so many years until really they could start tapping into that retirement.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're like, hey, the goal here is just to not necessarily turn and burn, but just to get this stuff working and grow it, right? Yeah. And so we've in essence partnered together. I think everything they have in their retirement account is 100% out with me right now when deals.
Cool.
And so and here's the thing, they're like, man, you've gotten me way more opportunities than I would have gotten on my own, and now my money's on a trajectory, working.
Yeah.
And they're excited because, hey, look, they've got their money working, and it was small, it's growing now, and we have a plan so that by the time they can start tapping into it, the goal is to grow it to a certain amount. And because of my deal flow, they can do it, and it's great for me because I get a lender, right, and an ally. Mm-hmm. And so those things are important, and so that's awesome. Great opportunities. Again, a lot of agents have mortgage broker partners, right? But the idea there is not every loan is a right fit for the houses that someone has, right? We see that all the time. Mm-hmm. So whether it's creative financing, whether it's someone who's going to lend privately, who might be willing to do something that a normal mortgage broker may not do. Yeah. As long as it's within the confines of what they can do. Yeah. So those things are important. So I think that's great. Mm-hmm. You guys offer those C classes in 2 states, right?
Yes, Florida and Georgia.
Yeah, because you guys have 2 offices. Mm-hmm. Where are they located?
We are currently in Largo, but we're moving to Clearwater, and that's where we're sitting right now. And in just 2 weeks, we'll be at the new office, and then we're also in the Atlanta area of Georgia, just outside of the perimeter.
And so, but like you guys serve me, I'm based out of New Orleans, so you guys can service customers nationwide.
Yeah, and worldwide.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, worldwide too. Mm-hmm. That's right. And then, but those are 2 locations. Yeah. If anyone wants to get in touch with you guys, whether it's to learn more about the webinars, say, hey, look, I have some questions, whatever that may be, or ultimately to open an account, how can Advanta help?
So I would just encourage everybody to reach out to me, and then I can make sure you get the right direction, whether it's going to the website, I can send you information. But my direct line is 727-754-9963. And then I'm happy to, email you anything that you need to get you started.
Okay. Well, I'm going to put that in the show notes as well as on the screen so you guys can have that. Anything else before we end? Is that the best way to get with you? And what's Advanta's website?
AdvantaIRA.com.
Yeah. So there's some things they'll be able to access there too. Yep. Larissa, thanks so much for having the conversation. It's been fun talking through it, guys. This is a really important topic that I think especially, being in the business for 10 years, it wasn't until toward the most recent years that I've actually started dabbling in this, and it's opened up a whole new level of doing it, right? Especially if the thought of growing, not just earning money, but earning money, how it gets taxed is so important. So that's a critical part. So thanks so much for joining with me today.
Thank you.